Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to welcome you to the next panel of European Ideas Forum. With a quite dramatic title, Lost but Not Forgotten, Education, Innovation and Competitiveness in Europe. In many ways, this panel is a continuation of our discussion of yesterday. Education, innovation and competitiveness are different concepts, but they're very much interlinked. They are also concepts where Europe has made a lot of economic, financial, but also political investment. But somehow, at least if you look at the discussion in Europe, it seems that Europeans are not totally happy, or European politicians. First of all, education. Our educational institutes in the global ranking are not exactly climbing up. Innovation, well, in this panel we'll discuss about artificial intelligence as an example, and of course competitiveness. So that is our setting, that is our discussion. And for that I have an excellent panel here. I'm very enthusiastic. First of all, Eva Maydell, member of the European Parliament from Bulgaria, talk leader here in Brussels as we speak about digital economy, also about youth, and member of Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, which is very relevant for this debate. Professor Bradford from Columbia University, professor of international law and organizations at Columbia Law School, also author of various books. We will come later to that part in our discussion. And Veterbacka, chairman and co-founder of Finest Future, but actually more known as a founder of Rovio and the father of Angry Birds. Mm-hmm. So we know him well. Also professor has professor functions in Asia, also motivational speaker, you name it. Mm-hmm. So up we go for discussion, and I would turn to Eva. You have been on this topic for already many years. So taking out the title of our discussion, Lost and Not Forgotten. Are we lost? Is Europe lost? So what is like 2-3 takeaways as you know, you would focus on this whole setting of our panel?
Well, you probably know that by nature I'm a very optimistic person. So I would say that nothing is lost yet. Indeed, I am also, apart from being optimistic, I'm a big realist. So we do find ourselves in a challenging position today. We're in a global race, in a global competition, particularly on the topics related to innovation and competitiveness. So I would like to think that we're in some sort of a sobering up moment, that we are not sleepwalking into another issue or challenge or a crisis, hopefully, but we have woken up to the need to speed up the way we think education, the way we think on innovation and competitiveness. The reason why I say this is because you rightly pointed out that I've been advocating on these topics for quite some time, but so has the Martin Center, actually. But sometimes member states, capitals have a different approach on these topics. We are heavily dominated by a Nordic panel, and I think this is great because you tend to perform so well in these areas. And these are areas where the rest of Europe and other parts of Europe can learn. I put an emphasis on the member states, but we have to put an emphasis also here in Brussels and the Brussels bubble. And lately, I kind of feel that we've been going from one crisis to another. We are living in a crisis mode, in a way. The important is, can we be planning ahead, looking ahead, strategizing, shaping a vision while constantly being in a crisis and having to tackle the problems of yesterday and today? And that's the challenge I see within the Council, within the European institutions in general. Most European councils are dominated of the problem that has already happened. And it's difficult to make sure we have something more than a nice sentence in the conclusions on those topics.
So, but how would you see it? Is it more a question of instrument or institutions, or is there something more challenging in the European economic model which creates this worrying reality?
Well, I have a different approach compared to many, I think, here. So, and I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't want to challenge our economic model per se. However, I think it has to do a lot with the way we think of Europe collectively, of how we want Europe to be positioned on the world stage in 5 or 10 years from now. Ideally more, but I do understand that poses even more challenges to think 15 years ahead of today. But going back, because I think in this room, most of us are convinced pro-Europeans, our founding fathers, so to say, were able to think long-term. They were able to put projects on the table that have stood the test of time and that have made Europe what it is today. So I wonder, aren't we also able to do something that's bigger than just a treaty change or reform, something that could shape the next many years to come for Europe? And that would require the ability to, focus on the future while living in a crisis. That would require a lot of leadership. And I'm not entirely sure that some countries possess the leadership that's needed to think so long term. And that would also require to change the way we think on our budget or the way we, put initiatives forward, even sometimes the way we legislate. So these are all uncomfortable things that we are not very comfortable diving into.
All right. Listen, I forgot to tell you in the beginning, so between us, we there in the back room, we decided that we call us, each other in first name basis, just to make clear that there's no disrespect here. So, Professor Bradford, Anu, so just for the background, when we speak here in Brussels about competitiveness, right or wrong, often we start to speak about the regulation. And one wording which always goes in that discussion is the Brussels effect. And in fact, Professor Bradford, Anu, is the person who coined the whole concept. And also participated in our discussion on EIF on those bases. She has come out with a new book, very exciting, Digital Empires, the Global Battle to Regulate Technology. Empires Battle. So maybe in a couple of words you could just describe the main synopsis of your newest book.
So thank you, Tomi, for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. So like the Brussels effect, I am really interested in Europe's place in the world. And in the digital empires, I take on the question of what is the EU's role in the midst of the two technology superpowers, the United States and China. So the EU is often portrayed as being a bystander and being forced to choose between the US and China that are leading the technological race. And I argue in the book that the Europeans are not forced to, nor are they willing to choose between an American way of thinking about digital society or the Chinese way. So the Chinese model, which is the state-driven model of regulating, which really relies on censorship and surveillance and propaganda, that for the Europeans is very oppressive. But the American market-driven model that is really focused on maximizing free speech and free markets, incentives to innovate, but basically that hands over the governance of technology to the tech companies themselves. For the Europeans, that is too permissive and also doesn't lead to the kind of society that is consistent with our values. So the Europeans have developed a third way, which is what I call a rights-driven model. So this notion of a human-centric digital transformation where the protection of fundamental rights of individuals, democratic structures of the society, and a more fair distribution of the gains from digital transformation take a center stage. So now one question in the book is, how does the European model fare compared to the Chinese and American model?
Indeed.
And here I argue that the American digital empire is actually failing. So around the world, there's increasingly a sense that the tech companies cannot be left to their own devices. They are not acting in our interest, and we actually do need to regulate. So the European model is gaining greater traction around the world. But there are certain concerns about the European model. One is that what does that mean for innovation? So yes, we have articulated a way how we protect digital rights, but does our model also accommodate innovation? The American model has been very conducive to innovation, but that also makes you ask, is all innovation beneficial? What kind of innovation do we want to see in Europe? But let me maybe mention one thing that leaves me particularly concerned, and that is in the sort of set of regulatory battles over technology. I do worry about liberal democracy. And I think liberal democracy can be lost in one of two ways here. One is that if the US and the EU lose their battle to China, the Chinese digital authoritarian model is gaining a lot of traction around the world. And China is able to legislate, and China is able to enforce its regulations. Americans cannot legislate, and the Europeans are having a hard time enforcing those legislations in this domain. So that is one way that I think we are really losing something fundamental. But liberal democracy can also be eroded if we lose our battle to tech companies. Because ultimately, I think if we have to admit that digital economy is either governed by authoritarians or the tech companies, we have lost what is essential about democratic digital society.
What you said, because you kind of underlined the aspect of potential conflict. And indeed, from your book, Brussels Effect, I remember when we discussed it in 2019-20 in the beginning, and now many things have happened. COVID, war in Ukraine, whole the flow of protectionism in a global economy. So that moment then and this moment now when you're coming out with your book, what are the trends? What are the dynamics? What has changed?
Yeah. So in many ways, I would say that we still observe the Brussels effect. The European legislative agenda, thanks to Eva and the colleagues, has been very active, very vibrant. And Europe has come up with just an extremely impressive legislative docket. So we have the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, soon the AI Act. And these legislations, they potentially generate the Brussels effect and influence the global digital economy. That happens also with some of our legislation around Green Deal. But there are certain trends that give me great pause, Tomi. And one is that we are increasingly looking at our economy through this lens of national security and increasing geopoliticization. And it happens for an understandable reason. But this conversation around digital sovereignty, strategic autonomy, is just taking over so many conversations compared to the time when I wrote the Brussels Effect. Yeah. And what does give me great concern is that we are moving towards increasing techno-protectionism with this kind of nativist narratives around data localization or harnessing our competition policy as a tool for industrial policy, building European champions. And I just don't see that we sort of get our European competitiveness issues addressed by trying to subsidize our way to competitiveness. We are going to run out of money before the Chinese do and before Americans do. And if you take the Brussels effect seriously, you need to understand that it is an effective tool to export good and bad regulations alike. And if we start, for instance, using our merger control as a way to build European national champions, what happens when a European company goes to Brazil and wants to acquire a Brazilian company? They may also like their national champions. And soon we are the main exporter of techno-nativism, techno-protectionism. And that kind of world doesn't serve Europe well. Then we are playing Beijing's game. And we are actually entrenching this state-driven model. And that is not the path to competitiveness.
Thank you very much. There's already so many points where we could deep into it, Eva and Anu said. But let's keep it still in general, a couple of minutes. Peter, I turn to you. On this discussion, what is most striking about you is actually that, listening my introduction, it was rather gloomy. Also, our discussion was not highly optimistic. Hearing from you, you speak in a very optimistic manner, but also, you do very impressive things. So listening us, what's your take? How do you see that? Is there a reason for optimism? Are we lost in Europe?
I think that we're very much winning. So I think that is one thing, and I think Eva also put nicely there that like how do we want to see ourselves, in Europe? And I think that we are very good at always, looking at the glass being half empty or like completely empty. And the way I look at it is that it's like full and it's like flowing over. And I think also like what Anu was mentioning there, I think we have good examples in history, and also like coming from Finland. And you look at, you probably have heard about Nokia. They're still around. What happened to Alcatel? What happened to Siemens? What happened to a lot of these companies that were national champions and protected? They didn't compete very well in an open market, so they are like gone. So I think that this is something that again we have good history of doing these things and opening market. And of course, I mean, we can all in Europe be very, very proud of things like GSM that we created. And that's like, again, ancient history, but it's still a great example of how we leveled the playing field and we won. And we were very, very successful. And I think that we're still enjoying that. I mean, we had discussion yesterday that, okay, we need to get back on track. But then when I look at the world, and I mean, again, China, US, of course, we always talk about, China and US winning. It's actually not true if you then start looking at what is happening. I think that everybody wants to be European, meaning that, people love freedom, democracy, the opportunity to pursue happiness. That might be, familiar from like the American playbook and all of that. But I always say that, and I asked, like some people here also if they've heard about the American dream. And, then people are like, yeah, of course. And I said, yeah, I mean, we made it real. I mean, if I look at like, again, looking at Finland, looking at the Nordic countries, I mean, everybody has, the freedom to pursue happiness. Okay, Finland, happiest country on the planet 6 years running, so it's like true. And Finnish people always ask, like, can it be true? But then one thing that I think that is important, and I mean also, it's really about the people. It's about us. And then like, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in a country where you don't enjoy the freedom, where you're being oppressed, you can't openly talk about like anything? If you say the wrong word, you might disappear. Not a very, very happy life, obviously. So, all of these, words that, like we talk about freedom and democracy and everything are very, very real. I mean, we take them for granted, our countries because, it's, there. If I ask young people in Finland about, freedom and democracy and equality and all of that, then it's like, why do you even talk about that? That's, like, we have that, it's there. But I think that what we need to do is that we need to also, kind of like get our attitude right, that, it's not doom and gloom. It's actually very, very positive. And I also, one thing that I think where we can do better, and we already have good things going, so education. I mean, Rishi Sunak had a very good speech, like I think it was last week, when he said that the only way to, make miracles, education. And I think that this is, again, one area where we are very, very strong. And one thing that we started doing in Finland, so I mean, we have been, if you look at the success and Nordic countries, so Eva was very right that, like we've done a few good things, but if you look at, like the stats, we are the most successful startup region on the planet. If you look at Finland, Estonia, Sweden, so I talk about the finest Bay Area, we actually have the highest number of startups per capita. We have the highest number of unicorns per capita. So unicorns, companies worth more than $1 billion. I was in Beijing before the pandemic, and there was a professor from Tsinghua University who was super proud of the fact that, hey, China, 200 unicorns, amazing, competing with Silicon Valley and US and all of that, head to head. 200 unicorns, but also 1.4 billion Chinese people. Then you look at Estonia, 1.3 million, not billion. So has anybody heard about Estonia? Last time I checked, it's in Europe, it's in the EU. Estonia has now 11 unicorns, 1.3 million people. So you need, a few 100,000 Estonians to make a unicorn, and you need 7 million Chinese people. So who is winning? I mean, it's again, of course, we always have to add this per capita, to show that we're number one. But also if you look at then another metric, the highest amount of venture capital invested into startups per capita, OECD numbers. Estonia number 1, Finland number 2, Lithuania number 3, Sweden number 4, and then the first country outside of the EU, US number 5. So all EU states, top 4, we're winning. I mean, no doubt about that. But then we've created a problem for ourselves, and this is actually true for like all of Europe, serious lack of talent. I mean, when I was at Rovio and working in Angry Birds, we had 47 different nationalities. Now it's more than 50, meaning that we hire the best people, no matter if they come from Brazil or the US or, you know, Bulgaria or Finland, you know, we don't care. And it's the same thing if you want to have a winning football or more fitting like ice hockey team coming from Finland. And I think our Slovak friends would agree that you need to get the best players from wherever they happen to be, and then you can win. So we need to make sure that we attract the talent. So what we decided to do in Finland is that we also think that the only sustainable way is that we leverage the fantastic education that we have. We don't have enough young people, but okay, the world is full of young people, so let's make sure that we attract them and get them to come to Finland and we offer them fantastic education. 3 years ago, we started teaching young people, first in Vietnam and Uzbekistan, Finnish language. So Finnish language, as everybody probably knows, it's one of the easiest languages to learn. So half a year, you get to be 1.1 level, you apply to high school, you come to Finland for high school, for university, and you stay for a happy life.
Yeah, and we discussed exactly in the background a little bit before preparing to this conference, and we discussed with Peter. I was asking, what do you mean exactly? Yeah. And you have, you have brought, you know, surprise phrase.
Yes. So I always say that, you know, in Europe we're very good at talking, and you know, like the Brussels effect involves a lot of, you know, that, but we need to also get serious about not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. Yeah. So as I said, we started doing this, and actually I invited Anna, who's sitting there. So Anna is one of the students, one of the young people actually from Vietnam that we taught Finnish language. She came to Mantan Lukio, one of the fantastic high schools in Finland, and she's now in her third year in high school. We started first year 15 students, last year 290, this year 1,000, and in next 5 years we're going to scale it to 30,000 young people from tens of countries all over the planet, learning the language, coming to our high school, staying for university, and guess what? Then starting companies, starting families, growth. So 5-10 years from now, when the OECD guys come to Finland, they ask us, how did you make this miracle happen? This is how we did it, through education. But hey, Anna, why don't you share with us what you think about your new life in Finland and why?
Right. Maybe you can give the microphone for, you know, input now in the middle of panel. Okay, Anna, please.
Hi, thank you for the floor.
Yeah, we were discussing about that, but okay.
Sano suomeksi
No,
we'll do it
in English.
But actually, one of the important things, so all the young people coming to Finland, they speak their own language, they speak Finnish, and they speak English. Trilingual, all of them. But yeah.
Right. Anna, short input.
Thank you for the floor. So my name is Thi Nguyen, actually my real name, and in Finland, some people call me Anna also. Peter is one of them. So I originally come from Vietnam, from Saigon in the south, and I've been studying and living in Finland in Manta cities for more than 2 years now. I think that if I talk about Finland, I think that Finland has taught me 2 things. The first one is happiness. Okay, it sounds very boring to say happiness, like. But I fully understand why is this like the happiest country in the world. But if you ask me, like many people actually ask me, like just talk about happiness. I'm like, no, I cannot talk about it. I just have to go there and live in Finland to understand the way that people, you know, like are content and satisfied about their life, and that they can, you know, I can, you know, be truly happy with being alone and myself and with the resources that I have in Finland. And I think that's very important. Like the feeling is not what I have ever experienced before, and I valued it a lot, but I just cannot explain why is it like happy. It's just happy. And you just have to live in Finland to understand that. And that's one of the things that Finland has grown in me. And the second thing is also I learned about freedom, and freedom in the way that it's just not something that I have known before. Like I went there, and I remember I had like a huge shock when one of my friends say like a very aggressive argument against our president, Sauli Niinistö. And I had like a shocking moment. I was like, how can you say that? Like, is it forbidden here? And it's like, no, you can say anything that you want. And then I realized, okay, so I can say anything that I want here without being like banned. And I started to participate in like European Youth Parliament as an active member. And there we hold like different stimulations of the European Parliament during the years. And we talked about different things, and we make like hundreds of resolution booklets to problems that I didn't even know exist before I participate in that. And we just openly talked and discussed about politics, about problems, and we want to solve. And it's just eye-opening for me. And also I start to, look up on startups, which is like a huge thing in Finland. And I have friends who just, talked about startup as if they are starting a game. Like they're just, I want to open like a startup on, like the gym shakers tomorrow. And I was like, it just sounds so simple, but it's possible in Finland. And how you can ask Peter, because he's one of like the most experienced startup like investor and entrepreneurs in Finland. But yeah, then I just feel like, okay, so this is how is it like the freedom to participate and the freedom to opportunities is what like Finland have, and I believe also like Europe have, and for me it's just so valuable, and it's just so new, and it's like a huge thing. It's just not something like obvious, but none of my like Finnish friends actually talked about that. So yeah.
Thank you so much. So I guess the issue here is that there's a model which we can expand in Europe. Okay, we have time now thank you Anna. We have time through our panel, and we have so many issues to go. So let's put the tempo up. But let's focus on a little bit more on this education, youth aspects, and let's have a quick round, and then we go back to this whole macroeconomic competitiveness, the big picture discussion. So Anu, you have been, your start of your education you did in Europe. Now you are in a very well positioned in the US university system, and you deal with young people and all that. So I bet that often you think, you make in your head the comparison, the education system in US and Europe, and lessons learned and all that. So how do you, listening Anna, what's your takeaway? What's your recommendation? How do you see this whole education dynamism in Europe?
Yeah. So let me just say, I just loved hearing about this program and hearing directly from Anna. And this is a huge part of my own vision of what is the strength of any competitive society. You cannot have innovations without innovators. You cannot have those without real talent. And I think Europe has really, sort of the way where Europe, I think, is most behind the US, it has failed to embrace immigration and talent. And the universities are really important gateway for American labor market. And if you look at the sort of immigration for a moment, I then go to the educational institutions. Over half of over $1 billion startups in the US have an immigrant founder. And even if we, for a moment, look at the biggest tech giants and their founders, so Steve Jobs of Apple is a second-generation Syrian. Jeff Bezos of Amazon is a second-generation Cuban. Elon Musk of Tesla is South African. Then Eduardo Saverin, the co-founder of Facebook, is Brazilian. Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, is Russian. And often these immigrants come to the US through the education system. So the US universities are seen as some of the best places to carry out the ambitious educational goals, achieve them, and also then to conduct research. And partially, the institutions are so strong because they have diverse student bodies. One of my favorite things of teaching at Columbia Law School is that I have probably 200 nationalities in that school, and they are in my classroom, and they are there. For instance, my Chinese students help research the book on China with the linguistic skills, with the legal training in the country. It is a tremendous asset for the conversations. And also then the students who come to study, for instance, engineering in the United States, they often stay in the US and directly feed into the labor market. Well, I think they are still often staying. There are many benefits that still make the US.
Allowed to stay.
Yes, and I think that's something that, for instance, when President Trump was trying to walk back the US's commitment to immigration and embracing immigrants as one of the strengthening pillars of America, that would have been a huge opportunity for Europe to roll out the red carpet and say that if the US doesn't want what has served the country so well, welcome to Europe and embrace that potential talent. But I think the universities, there are certain differences that I observe daily. Having been educated first in Finland and then went to Harvard for my doctorate and then taught at the University of Chicago and now at Columbia for 11 years, is that in addition to diversity, there is a certain just palpable optimistic ambition. So the students are there to eagerly learn on a daily basis. And they really want to push themselves. They want to push me as their educator to make sure that they make every class count. And they make most of the opportunities that they are given. So there is a certain sort of energy in the classroom. There's also the kind of critical thinking. They have the confidence to challenge my views and the way I teach them. So they really bring themselves and their views to the conversation. And they do that from an early age. My children are going through an American education system, and from very early on they do public speaking, and they are taught to articulate their views and also respectfully but confidently sort of stand their ground and also say if they disagree with conventional wisdom. So the question of curiosity and confidence, the questioning mindset, I think it's very much part of the ethos of the American education system, and it does nurture entrepreneurship.
Great.
I have to add one thing there. So your kids are going to which school?
Yeah, so I think there is a huge difference with the best and with less performing institutions
so do you know
in the US.
Anybody here know which school in Finland is the best school?
All of them.
Yeah, the nearest school is the best school.
Yeah.
So this is something that, again, why I really believe that we are winning. And I mean, we need to kind of like invest in education and education of like our young people. That's the most important thing, and that's how we make miracles happen. And that's for all of Europe. And we're not quite there, all of Europe yet, but we'll get there. And also, if you look at now the numbers for the US, actually the number of international students going to the US have actually been going down. And first time in 30 years, State Department and the Ministry of Education had to issue a joint statement now during like the Biden presidency that students are still welcome to the US. And I think that this is a massive opportunity for us here in Europe because, as I said, everybody wants to be a European. You want to enjoy, freedom, the European like quality of life, the lifestyle. And this is again one area where we can learn from our American friends that we need to get our attitude sorted, the mindset. That it's a little bit like, why would anybody come to Europe? I mean, why wouldn't you? I think this is something that we really, really need to do because we have this, like European reality. We can offer this fantastic opportunity, this lifestyle, and this is something that we need to do. And always when we start talking about immigration, then people start thinking refugees and like blah blah blah. But I mean, immigration through education is super powerful, and that's what's made America great. I mean, that's like really the thing, and I think that we need to we have everything going for us, but we are not putting it into full use, and that's why I have no doubt about like Europe winning this game.
Great. Eva, how do you would react on
Well,
Peter?
I would react from the point of view of someone working in a European institution and go back a couple of years ago. It's more than 10 years now that I've been calling for us to focus on education at a EU-wide level. And I remember my very first encounters in the European Parliament with some of the heavyweights of the European Parliament, Elmar Brok to name one, because I know he's well known in this crowd. We fought so hard. He's like, that's a national competence. Don't even mention it. Don't talk about skills. Like, why should we even go to talk about entrepreneurs, startups? I think I was probably the first lawmaker in the parliament to suggest the words startup, scale up, unicorn in a European legislation. We still talk about SMEs being the backbone, but the backbone is so diverse today. Yeah. So we have to come out of what we knew 10 years ago was valid and what are the realities of today. just this year is the year of skills. And my question is, what do we want to achieve with that year, actually? Raise awareness, one would say. But I would be like, okay, let's put some indicators. There could be 2 indicators. One could be related to immigration through education, even though that's way too bold and it won't happen. But you could put any 2 indicators and measure what we have actually achieved in the end of the year. What we do right now is basically say we did X amount of events, but what did the events contribute to? It's about walking the talk in the end of the day. And this is why when it comes to Peter's passion here, I mean, the passion you have and the way you talk about the ecosystem and how it can develop and how we can be better. I mean, I would love to see that passion at many levels in European institutions, in the Commission, in national member states, because it's also through that passion that we can not just promote the European way of life, because I don't think it actually needs promotion, but it's more about making it operational for the years to come, because part of the European way of life is also our economic prosperity, the freedom that we have, the way our democratic system works. But my concern, because competitiveness is one of the words on our panel, my concern is the actual competitiveness. If you look at our growth figures, just for the Eurozone over the last 15 years, Eurozone countries, even though there's more countries that are part of the Eurozone, we have grown so little compared to doubling the economy in the US and the growth numbers. So obviously something is not going in the right direction. And we do have those concrete particular examples in certain regions or countries, but how do we scale that? And how do we make that environment possible for other countries and other regions to be able to have that passion? And that passion is not just an empty passion, it's because you've actually create, you deliver. You're proud of certain areas in your economy and your society that are excellent. So how do we get to that excellence in Europe in more different areas?
Great. That's a good moment to give floor to Sandra. We were speaking earlier about Slido. So Sandra, floor is yours to give what was the results of our polling.
Indeed, thank you, Tomi. We've heard a little bit about Finnish best practices, also about the American. Eva touched upon on what the EU is doing to improve innovation and competitiveness in Europe, and this was indeed also a question that we asked our audience. 41% of you answered that the EU should provide massive investment in research grants and funding. 34% of our audience said that the EU should reform the European economic model, and 24% said that the EU should invest in primary and secondary education. So a little bit mix of all answers. Back to you, Tomi.
Thank you, Sandra. So at least, we are not...
This is our problem. So you're wrong.
All right,
Best.
okay, straight talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In one sentence, why we are wrong?
Because the thing is that it's all about the talent. And I mean, this is also why I know that we will win in Finland, because we will have the talent. We'll have the highest talent density anywhere on the planet. And there's no way you can spend your way into that. It doesn't work. I mean, you can improve or increase all these grants and all this stuff as much as you want, but if you have no people to kind of like run with that money, it will amount to nothing. It's like a complete waste of our taxpayers' money. So it's not going to work. If we don't, and I mean, this is again what Richie Sunak got right, that the only way to create miracles is through education. And I mean, if we don't have that working, we're not going to win. I mean, and this is actually a strength of Europe, and we need to invest more into education. And it's not just universities, it's like the whole thing. I mean, what is totally broken in the US, from my perspective, is that yes, fantastic universities. Where do the fantastic students come to Columbia? They come from the rest of the world, they don't come from the US. I mean, of course, some of them do. And this is kind of like the thing that we have in Europe, and we need to invest more into primary, secondary education, not less. And then we don't even need to have all of these grants and all of that stuff, because people will make amazing things happen. It's all about the people. I mean, this is like why we will win. We're not going to win by giving people, money that or go invent something. Here's $1 million or $1 billion or whatever. Doesn't work.
It's a good opportunity to take that back to actually yesterday's discussion, because there was quite, we were discussing about the Green Deal and all those economic dynamics. And so my question, to take it a little bit back, because there was an argument, and I would turn now to Anu, is that, well, basically, the point was, and it's about the focus on the regulation in Europe. And the point which was made is that as having the system we have, we are going to, strangle ourselves economically while being sure that we respect every regulation we have. Which means that here in EU we have a discussion about our single market. Yesterday many points were made that actually it's quite fragmented. Yeah. And so how does this, over-focus on regulation, well, later we can come on the issue of entrepreneurship, how does it play out with your, your main argument, and how do you see that, EU as a regulative power, as we have this huge discussion about how our own regulations, and you mentioned yourself the challenge of implementing what we decide.
Yeah. So there is often this notion that digital regulation is inevitably impeding innovation. And that's what the Americans are looking at, the European model, and say, we all can name the GDPR, but name a European tech company. Yeah. And then they pause. But I really would like to dispute this notion that by regulating the digital economy, by protecting the user's privacy, by making sure that hate speech and disinformation does not blanket our online space, we are somehow being left behind. So I think it's absolutely compatible to pursue ambitious digital regulation and enforce that regulation if we take care of the other components of our tech ecosystem and our innovation, components of innovation. So there I fully agree on talent. I think that is one key piece. It's not the only piece. You also need to make sure that you can embed the talent in an environment that then fosters entrepreneurship and innovations. So if I think about, for instance, what the EU would need to focus on. So regulatory agenda should march on, but it shouldn't take our attention away from the urgency of completing the digital single market and single market more broadly. That is the strength of our economic power, and we need to tirelessly work to complete that. We need a capital markets union. We need deep, robust capital markets so that you can fund those innovations in the EU. Currently, we have actually pretty good startup activity, but it's hard to scale in the EU. When it comes to more advanced funding rounds, often you need foreign capital. Third, entrepreneurs need to be allowed to fail. And we do not have the culture, nor do we have bankruptcy laws that are anything but punitive. So European entrepreneurs cannot take risks because it's hard for them to fundraise after that. So those are some of the issues that I think we should be tirelessly focusing on. And absolutely talent is the key, but if I can take an example, for instance, in the domain of artificial intelligence, and we ask who wins the AI race. I think talent is one of the key 4 components that you need to win that race. Second is that you need to have access to data. And this is something that we are behind both Americans and Chinese. We do not have the companies that are globally sourcing the data, nor we, for a good reason, have the Chinese government's practice of harnessing the data without any protections. But then also you need to have the computing power, you need to have the hardware so that you can actually run these models. And there comes the tricky question. I don't think necessarily that throwing 40 billion so that we are only 80% dependent as opposed to 90% dependent on semiconductors is the answer. But the question is, what is then a sustainable pro-competition path towards greater or optimal amount of digital sovereignty? Because we still need to make sure that we are not vulnerable to foreign assets in that regard. And then we need to have institutions that are capable of adapting AI. And that's also something that I think that we need to think about. You don't just develop the AI, but how do you apply that? And are our institutions in the position to do that? So I think I agree that talent is the key, but then there's a rather complex agenda. And I would really channel the kind of Peter type of ambition across all those components that should occupy all the European lawmakers, all the European regulators, because it's great to be a regulatory superpower. I think it's important that we influence the rules of the game. And I believe in the vision that our regulations advance, but we shouldn't just be a referee. We need to get on the field, we need to play the game, we need to play offense and defense and play it well.
And Eva, if I can throw to you, you're
trying
googling
to
something
find
on the
something.
issue.
I'm trying to find
So
something I wanna quote.
my question, what Anu said, and in two parts. First of all, Anu's points was that you can regulate, but you have to take care of the framework, in many aspects. A, are we doing that? And B, actually, if you just think our economic policy discussion in EU, let's say Lisbon agenda, we remember the language was much more different. We were speaking about entrepreneurship, competitiveness in totally dimension. Now it's about industrial policy and investments with taxpayers' money. So how do you see it? How do you take in what Anu just said?
Well, speaking about competitiveness, I want to draw a little bit of attention towards the latest digital decade report, because this is something that the Commission has issued just 10 days or so ago, and I think it did not gain the necessary attention it should gain, because the numbers are not just worrying, they're striking. First of all, how far we are from the goals and names that we've put, and second of all, by stating where we are today. So what it states is that AI is uptaken by European companies only at 11% at the moment. We rely on foreign countries 80% on our digital products and services. And our share of global revenue in ICT has drastically fallen. So these are just three of the many other indicators, and the other indicators are not very colorful and don't necessarily speak in favor of our leadership in those fields. Why I think we should have put more emphasis on this data is because we need to see where we actually are in order to base our ideas, vision, legislative proposals, or our funding in the right direction. If you ask me who is the person in charge of competitiveness today in the European institutions, I'm not entirely sure. If you ask me what is our actual response to the digital resilience or digital sovereignty, it depends who you ask, you get a different response. And I think to a certain extent that's the case because member states have different visions of the way forward. But we need to be able to unite the leadership at national level to come up with a vision, which doesn't mean we need to pick the next digital champion, no, but to make sure that we are going to put, whether it's the funding or whether it's the certain, facilities to enable that single market to be fully digital. So when we speak about the single market, we know it means that it's also digital single market. And that can happen by, yes, there is perhaps legislation that has to be amended, others that has to be maybe scratched, and third that has to be rethought. In the same time, I'm a big advocate on the Capital Markets Union or something like a tech sovereign fund that needs to be set up, but we do understand the constraints and the difficulties for this to happen. But someone should finally sit and say, are we going to make it work or no? Because it's a lot of many years that we are talking about it, but we are not fast forwarding. So we need some clarity. Otherwise, it's a fruit hanging out there, but we don't know if it's doable or not. So a little bit of sobering up combined with some passion to achieve those very difficult goals, because I know they're not something that is urgent and pressing, but it is in order for us to avoid getting into another dependency, getting into another crisis, getting into an economic downfall, and definitely not being part of the race of forming that global tech race.
All right.
But then like my question about Estonia or Finland. Last time I checked, and Sweden, part of the EU. So if we have 11 unicorns in Estonia, last time I checked, we didn't have a few hundred unicorns in Germany or France. So what's happening? Why don't we see all of Europe performing at that same level? We have the same regulation, so it's not like, there's something stopping then, our German and French and Spanish and whatever friends doing the same. There's nothing stopping you. Same regulation. So, so we can't use that as an excuse. If some countries are performing better than the US, better than China, why isn't all of Europe doing the same?
Yeah,
I mean,
I would make it,
Bulgaria.
I mean, I would put one word, mindset, and you also mentioned it earlier.
and I would also make the, okay, we can underline Finland and Estonia, but actually there's many regions in Europe, not maybe the countries themselves, but the regions which are doing very well. Listen, I have been a little bit bad moderator in the sense that I have kind of left the audience and not giving the floor for audience. We are running out of time a little bit, so we take 2-3 questions still, very short ones, set the question, and then we go to the closing round of the panel, because time is running. So, do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, we have, I can see 2 there. Be very precise. Precise and with the question, and then I turn to panel. So you have there, and then you have there, and those 2, and then we come back to panel. Please be short, be precise.
Thank you, Tomi. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. I'm an American. I'm retired here. And I like the emphasis that you put on education. And I'm trying to figure out where education fits in terms of the transatlantic relationship.
Keep it on the question.
Deepening the transatlantic relationship. Right now, for eons of years, we've dealt with a very set paradigm as to what kind of interchanges we have. Basically, an American student is treated like a Chinese student or a Russian student in trying to study in the EU and vice versa. So I'm wondering if there is a time to, instead of TTIP and geopolitical realignments and diplomatic cooperation, whether looking forward, it makes sense to deepen the educational interaction between the US and Europe in order for us together to advance in the future.
All right, and the second there, very short question, please.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to offer 2 answers, quick answers to Peter's question. Number 1, why not in Germany? I have a child at the European school. We are looking for German teachers. We can't get German teachers here. Why not? Because there aren't enough in Germany. Primary and secondary education. Yes. One answer. Second, I'm today in venture capital. And here, I think Eva's point, mindset in our investors is not there. European investors don't think technological risk. What do you think of those?
Totally agree, and I think that what you mentioned there, teachers, that's like absolutely key. When Estonia regained its independence, like early 90s, after years and years of Soviet oppression, first thing we did, we sent Kari Niinistö, older brother of Sauli Niinistö, who was running teacher education at University of Turku, to Tartu University, together with Jaak Aaviksoo. They redefined teacher education in Estonia. Estonia #1 right now. So wonder why teachers. So I think that is again really difficult for me to understand why we don't understand this Europe-wide. Yeah, it's about money, but I mean, the thing is that we need to think long term, and this is something that we can't fix 5 years. I mean, it takes 10, even more. But when we do this, we win. And this is, again, why, I was commenting that we got it wrong on the slide, that we need to invest. It doesn't come, and it's actually cheap compared to like the money that we're throwing away at like various like initiatives. So I think that we could actually save some taxpayers' money by doing things differently, investing in the people.
All right, great. We go for the closing round, so for the answering the questions, and then if you maybe one made like takeaways from this panel. Mm-hmm. So what is your like the one point you want to us to remember, and one reason to be optimistic? So answer, you can choose the questions, one advice, and the one reason to be optimistic. So we kind of end happily this thing.
So maybe just one comment on the educational piece. I am one of those beneficiaries who went to the United States for my master's, and it just opened my world. I love the mindset, I love the energy, I love the contestation in the classroom, I love the confidence-building way of teaching. It was empowering, it was just ecstatic, and I haven't returned. I come always back because this is still a place that I firmly believe that I belong and continue to belong and continue to invest in. Because I think I have deep concerns about many aspects of the United States. I think there are many reasons for lifestyle, for stability even right now, for students to choose to come to Europe instead. We are charging over $60,000 a year for students to study at Columbia Law School. That is not a path. We cannot educate the entire world. But ultimately, there's a lot that in terms of that mindset is not something that is the sort of touch to the price tag. So maybe one sort of takeaway in general, I really want Europe to understand what are its strengths and never forget that. Because right now, if we are moving towards techno-protectionism, we are playing Beijing's game and we are moving away from the territory within which we can excel. So I think this panel has had the kind of optimism about the building blocks that have nothing to do with closed economy. We need to continue to be open. We need to continue to work with our like-minded partners. And we even need to continue to engage to the extent that we can with the regions and the countries that are more challenging for us. But ultimately, I believe in open Europe. I believe in Europe that does believe in itself and hope to bring that. But I think the friends of Europe and the ones who really cheer for it also need to be its honest critics.
Great, Anu. A high note. Eva, so main takeaway and reason to be optimistic.
Well, a reason to be optimistic is having Peter here and the passion he shared with all of us. He definitely energized me and gave me the belief and the trust that we do have those bright minds across Europe. I think it will make a lot of sense to meet more often with them, to discuss, a debate, and to get to work. We have a lot of work to do, and that's not a bad thing. I think we all love Europe, and we want to work for Europe. So it's now the time to do that. We should not be thinking it's an election year. We can start preparing already now. But with that optimism and that passion, I think it will be easier to get to work.
Great, Eva. And Peter, so main takeaway, main message, and the main reason to be so optimistic.
I really think that like the answer is very simple, that it's about the people and it's about the young people. I think that's, you know, young people are the future. I mean, it's biology, all people die. So, you know, that's how it works. But so we need to invest in the young people. I mean, that's like, you know, obvious to me. But then also, I mean, we talked a lot about education, but I think it also is, you know, like always the mindset and all of that, that I always say that who cares if you have the best education on the planet if you don't do anything with it. And I think Europe has a bit of that problem, that we have figured out like the education piece to, you know, some extent, but then we still have this attitude problem. I mean, and this is again that we still have universities that think that it's a bad thing to work with, you know, the business side, because, you know, like that's, you know, like suspicious and, you know, like bad. And I think that we need to fix this, that it's okay to actually take that fantastic education, and then you throw in like the second E, like entrepreneurship. So you combine education and entrepreneurship, and we train our young people. So you heard from Anna that, you know, all the people that come to Finland now, we give them the language, so we train in language, but also on startup entrepreneurship. You know, so like, what do you do with the education? You can start a company. You have the freedom. You can do that. And I was super happy. It was like 2 weeks ago, Simo, who is a principal at Forssan Lukio, one of the high schools, and he sent me a message on WhatsApp that, hey, I went with this, you know, Vietnamese girl, she's our first year in high school, and helped her start her company. You know, first year high school company, done. You know, so this is what we need, that we need to kind of like use this education, and we need to unleash the talent. And this is again when I say that it's going to be impossible for anybody to catch up with us, because we started investing in this talent years ago. We're years ahead of rest of the world. We will have the biggest and densest talent pool anywhere on the planet, and the ones with the talent will win, and that will be us.
Great finish. Very, very good. Okay, so with that happy upward going note, we finished, and I will give floor now to Sandra to make the concluding procedures, so to say. Sandra, floor is yours.